all of you are here because you have read the Vita of Anderson. Okay, let me tell you a small little secret that you may not know for Anderson. He just returned from a sabbatical to India, correct? So that's, I don't think it's listed in his bio. But without further ado, let's hear Anderson, next slide, please, to talk about synthetic realities, trust, and biometrics. What's ahead? So I really like these talks because it's going to tell us what should we expect. Anderson?
Thank you, Ioannis, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen now, and we can start. So I guess you all can see my screen in the presentation mode, right?
You can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so let me start. So I'm going to talk about synthetic realities, and I'm going to define this term for you and discuss a little bit what's ahead. The idea here is that I present in about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we have some time for questions. I think the most interesting part is the question. So just quickly, I'm a professor at the University of Campinas for 15 years, and I work with AI for 22 years already. And our lab, Record AI, this one that you can see in my t-shirt, we have about 260 collaborators around the world. So the stuff that I'm going to show you is the result of many collaborations, and this is not the result of only my research. Okay, this is the result of several collaborations. And the interesting thing that I'm going to show next is that we all have this feeling that everything is happening everywhere all at once. So the speed, the pace of change is very, very unattainable. So we have this feeling of anxiety and everything is changing. And the same goes for like technology, for science, for everything. And one of the reasons for this speed of change is this tiny little thing called AI. And AI, how everybody knows, has the good things, the bad things, and the ugly things. So some of the good things of AI that you probably already know: cancer screening. We have techniques being developed to help us screen different types of cancer and augment our capacities to detect early on these serious diseases. We also have the development of vaccines. An example of that is the combination of AI techniques and messenger RNA editing with CRISPR-Cas9, and the result of that is what we use it for COVID-19, the vaccines based on mRNA. Another example is AlphaFold and the prediction of the folding of proteins, conservation of wildlife, or even saving the bees. All of these are very nice examples of AI for good. Here in my lab, we also have a hub for AI for health and well-being called VivaBem, which is like live well in English. The idea is to detect early on signs of some diseases like panic attacks or diabetes or Parkinson. All of this come with the help of technology, with the help of AI. Improving the quality of seeds and the production of food, fighting climate change, poverty, and inequality, all of these very, very nice examples of the use of technology, of the use of AI. But still, we have this feeling that everything is happening everywhere, all at the same time. And the reason is that many years ago, we had like this first revolution of the human knowledge, the industrial revolution around 1760, then the second one with the electricity around 1820, and then the computing in the 1900s, especially around the Second World War. And then the fourth industrial revolution, which is basically today. But the fourth industrial revolution only tells us the story of the industrial side, but it's much more complex than that. What we are living, actually, it's called the convergence revolution, which is the combination of at least 5 exponential technologies. And any improvement in one of these technologies will represent improvements in the others as well. They accelerate each other and then converge to a specific point. These 5 technologies are biotech, and genetics, the first one, an example of the vaccines that I just mentioned here, CRISPR-Cas9, and AI for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines for COVID. The second technology is nanotech. Everything is getting smaller, and we can now observe things that it was not possible before. Then we also have improvements in the macro scale with robotics, and everything is connected with sensors. So we have the Internet of Things, which is the fourth technology. And then we have, behind everything, we have AI, and AI processes it all, right? So all of this is called the convergence revolution. And as you can see, again, we have these very nice uses of it for cancer, saving animals, fighting inequality, all of this, very good uses. What about the bad uses of it? So when you open a newspaper, sometimes you see the good uses of AI, but more recently, what you read the most is like the danger that we're going to be taken over. So here you have HAL 9000, and this is a narrative that started like in 1960 with this very nice story of Stanley Kubrick. We see many narratives of humans being taken over and AI dominating the world like Next Machina. And this story of HAL 9000 and 2001, A Space Odyssey of Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, it is just an illustration of what the newspapers and the media typically use. But this narrative of the bad use of AI is just a narrative, as I said. This interests only some people because it sells the news, it sells newspapers. So we are not focusing on this. We are going to focus on something more important, which is this. So we need to understand what's happening. We need to understand the technology because, as Arthur C. Clarke mentioned, any sufficiently advanced technology is not distinguishable from magic. So if people do not understand what they see, they are going to think that's magic. And if they think that's magic, they don't question. So our task as scientists is to understand what's going on. And our task here specifically is to understand what's going on in terms of the creation of media, okay? So the ugly use of AI, of course, is in fake news. So fake news is spread all over, and Brazil, US, Europe is not safe. Everyone sees every once in a while, more often than not, fake news afloat. And the reason it works, it can be explained by this marvelous work of Daniel Kahneman and Dave McCraney. What you see is all there is. So typically, what we see as humans, what we hear, typically we don't question. So what our senses see and feel, typically we don't question. And the reason is that basically we have 2 systems in our brains, system 1 and system 2, to simplify things, according to this very good book of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. System 1 is very fast and is reactive, and it does not consume pretty much any calories. It's very fast and cheap. So when you read something, typically you just activate system 1. You read it, oh, that's good. When you see it, it's even more so. When you see it, it's like you believe what you see. So it's because you're not questioning. So if you're not questioning, this is system 1. But if you are able to activate system 2, which is like much more time consuming, it uses much more calories, but it criticizes things. So when you think about something critically, you are activating system 2. The thing is, most of the time is in our day, like 99% of the times, we just act with system 1. We just like reply to things without thinking. So the idea here is that people are using these they are using this knowledge that we have built in our brain to explore it, and to explore it with fake news, with fake images, with fake concepts, with fake narratives. And typically people don't question. So to fight this, we have digital forensics, for instance. We have biometrics studies. We have techniques being developed to help fight this kind of non-activation of System 1 and to provide the tools to help people to think critically. So if we go for forensics specifically, it's the set of techniques to collect, preserve, validate, identify, analyze, and interpret digital evidence. So the idea here is that we get an evidence, we analyze it, and we interpret it. And it works because, according to the principle of Edmond Lockhart, everything that you do leaves a trace. So if you get an image and you modify it, it leaves a trace. If you go there and commit a crime, it will be traces around left behind. So this is not different for identifying fakes. So historically speaking, like about 20 years ago, the main objective of the field of digital forensics was to separate what was real and what was fake. And basically we used computer vision and image processing to do that. Or another objective was to identify if a particular digital object, like an image, had a hidden message, something that we called stig analysis. Or to separate what was computer generated by using computer graphics or a photograph. Or to find the origin, the source sensor of a specific photograph. It can be like a cell phone, a scanner, or a camera. Or even to trace back the history of a specific object online, like an image, and to see if an image is like just another version of another image, something called phylogeny. So the fact is, we always have relied on artifacts. And these artifacts could be related to the acquisition process of an image, or to illumination inconsistencies in shadows, or changes in the file structures, or structural properties like a lack of smooth transitions between foreground and background, or even artifacts related to compression. So if you think of the pipeline of acquisition of an image, typically you have the image that you want to acquire. So suppose that we have this beautiful tree here and we want to take a photo of it. So we're going to have the light inciting on this tree, and the light goes and hits the lenses of the camera, where we can have some processing for exposition, focus, and stabilization. Everything here is analog. Then it goes to some filters, and only then it hits the sensors that will be responsible for transforming these analog information into digital. And typically we have some sensors here of the kind of CCD or CMOS. But the process is, because of costs, this process of capturing the light, the photons, and integrating them in each sensor of this camera only captures one color at a time. If it only captures one color at a time, we need to combine the neighbors to create the colored version RGB that we typically see. But each camera has its own standard, its own way of combining neighbor. We can combine more neighbors, less neighbors. We can use a specific filter. We can use bilinear. We can use even simple filters if the camera is too cheap. But everything leaves a trace. And then when you combine different images, we kind of break this relationship. The same thing happens when you combine images that were compressed using JPEG. As JPEG splits the image in blocks of 8 by 8, if you copy a piece of an image into another, if they have different gridding blocks, we are going to see some differences and some inconsistencies. And this all helped us to identify forgeries. And here is an example of a real case, the Iranian missiles case of 2008, of duplicated regions and modified regions. So all of these can be referred to as structural artifacts. They were related to pixel repetition, interpolation breakup, compression misalignment, lack of smooth transitions, all of this. And historically speaking, one of the first versions simply just split the image into small blocks, sliding windows, transformed each block with like PCA or wavelets or DCT, linearize it, sorted lexicographically, and compared to a threshold. This was how we did identification of forgeries of copy move 20 years ago. But then, of course, if you resized the blocks or if you resized, transformed the images, it would not work. So better versions came along with like interest points that were robust to some transformations. And then also multi-scale approaches appeared. This one proposed by our team, and it was considered one of the best papers of 2016 in forensics. Well, here we divided the image into several scales and processed it for robust key points in each of these scales and detected forgeries in different scales and combined them probabilistically. But then everything changed. So this was how things worked for more than 15 years in digital forensics, from 2000 to 2015, 2016, even 17. But then something happened in 2016, mainly with the US elections. Something came along. And from then on, we started what it's called the era of synthetic realities. And it's very important that we understand what we mean by synthetic reality. Synthetic reality is not just something generated with AI help. If you go there and you just generated a digital object, it's not synthetic reality. It's just a synthetic object. Synthetic reality, when we mean it, what we mean with it is the combination of AI-driven media, AI-driven synthetic media, okay, like a synthetic face, a synthetic voice, or even a synthetic text, with a context and with a narrative. So the idea of synthetic reality is really to create something alternative, to create a reality that is alternative to the real reality, okay, to the actual reality. And it's possible now because of data, of course. We have data as never before. We have processing power as never before. And then we have very, very good AI techniques to allow the creation of these methods, of these realities. And it's happening mainly with generative AI, because generative AI, contrary to what has been done before in terms of machine learning, which was mainly discriminative, separating one group from the other, one class from the other, with generative AI, we can really create something. And then when you can really create something, you can easily attach a narrative and a context to something that you create. So with this, you can create a synthetic reality, okay? And a synthetic reality will most of the times be spread as fake news, and people will believe it. And people will believe it because, as I said before, we typically do not question things. We typically just use our system one in our brains, the one that's reactive and uses very few calories. So I'm going to show you some examples of these creations. So here's an example of DALL-E 2. DALL-E 2 has been improved recently with DALL-E 3. But with 2, you can already identify where we are going. So here's an example. I'm going to speed up the video to this specific part.
Next one is underwater city of glass painting. Like this input, you would never imagine that it will generate something like this.
So think about this. We prompt something to the computer. Call of Duty first-person shooter in a Titian painting. It's very interesting to see the stage of advance that we are right now, when we can develop an algorithm that's capable of receiving an input like this and to parse it, specifically to see what it means, Call of Duty, what it means to be first-person shooter, and more complex yet, in a style of a painting of a very great painter of the Renaissance. Who is Titian? Titian was a very great painter in the Renaissance. And here we have these very different concepts put together, and it's a very nice result in the end. Or you can see others, even more complex ones, like this one. This one was awarded the best painting award last year in a competition in the US. It was created by Jason Allen. It's called the Theater of the Spatial Opera, or in French, Théâtre d'Opéra Spatiale. And this is the result of 800 plus interactions of Jason Allen with Midjourney. So this is the result of a refinement process of more than 800 interactions of him with Midjourney. And you gotta believe, you gotta admit, this is a very good result. When you see this printed in like a canvas of like 3 meters wide, it's something that calls your attention. Even digitally, it calls your attention. So it's pretty good. So this is the stage where we are in terms of generation. And if you stay like this, not a problem. You can generate many good things. You can use it in many good opportunities. The problem is when you use this to change reality, to deceive other people. So here's an example of a creation, totally synthetic, with the objective of, and here is just to show you the capabilities that we have. This example that I'm going to show next, probably you have seen it before. It's not anymore the state of the art. This was created around 2 years ago, and it was already pretty good. So you're going to see that the face and everything was created, the voice was created, and the person probably you know.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
Again, this is not the state of the art anymore, and it was already pretty believable. And the thing that I just showed you is called deepfakes. It can be done with audio, with images, with videos. Here's another example. This was just launched around 2 months ago, and it's done by Adobe. Pay attention mainly to the prompts and see how easy it is to change things. So everything that you see might be fake. Everything that you see might have been modified. Actually, if you remember, I just mentioned, and hold on to your chairs because this is going to be surprising. I just mentioned that the process of creating a picture, a photograph, uses the combination of neighbors. As we have R, G, and B, and we don't have the sensors for the R, G, and B, and each of the positions, we only capture the R or the G or the B, It means that every digital picture that you ever seen, 2/3 of it is the result of the creation of combination of neighbors. They are not real. They are the combination of neighbors. 2/3 of the pixels of every image that you had seen in your life is the result of the combination of pixel neighbors, not exactly as the pixel should have been captured. Yeah, that's kind of scary. So what we see is not really there. The same thing happens for ChatGPT. What we have the capabilities now to create synthetic text. So you can do, probably all of you have interacted with it. And here's another example launched 1 month ago. This is the latest version of Midjourney. This is like the darling of Hollywood now, and you're going to understand why. Look at the quality of the images, like cinema quality. So with all of it, we start questioning, are we real? When you interact with me over Zoom, am I really here? And you should know that I could not. I might be someone else. So we already have the technology to have a Zoom call, and the other side could pretend to be another person in real time, changing the voice and face. And this has been used for grooming, for instance, when adults try to convince children to do something they want. So when they have conversations with children over the internet, they pretend to be someone else. So that's why we really need to develop the tools to help us understand what's going on, to detect this kind of things, because we don't want the return of magicians. We don't want people to think that everything is magic. It's not, it's just mathematics. So what can we do? The first thing that we have to have in mind is that it is very unlikely that just one method will detect this kind of thing. So the first thing is to empower the combination of different methods. So to invest some time in the development of probabilistic methods. So here's an example of a method that we developed in collaboration with several people. Instead of just using one detector for forgeries, for instance, you can use as much as you want. Each one of them will produce a map, a probabilistic map at the end, and then we combine them probabilistically. So this is what we designed some years ago, called the knowledge, behavioral knowledge space. So one important lesson here is that it is going to be impossible to detect forgeries or falsifications or deep fakes or whatever with just one method. Because the methods, they get better and better with time. So if today I discover that blinking is one artifact, tomorrow I can see a method that already incorporates blinking as part of the creation. So we need to have a combination of methods, because each method will give us some different aspect of what's going on. So here's an example. This is considered one of the state of the art in terms of detecting deepfakes right now. It was published in TIFFs recently. And the idea here is that, as I mentioned to you, there is a process of interaction between the photons and the sensors during the capture of an image. So during the process of creating the RGB image that's going to be your photograph, we have the interaction of the photons with the sensors, and this process is transforming some analog information into digital. Whenever you have the transformation of some analog information into digital, there is noise. There is noise resulting from the interaction of the sensor with the object. And then this noise can be leveraged to help us decide if something is a photograph or generated in the computer. So what we do here in this technique is that we design an end-to-end method in such a way that we explore this information, the noise resulting from the capturing process and the noise that is intrinsic of photographs and intrinsic of the methods that generate fakes. And we also explore the fact that the semantics will change. So if you look locally in the transition between the face and the background, we are going to see some important hints and telltales about what is fake and what's not. So for this, we learned this with some existing data sets, and the method is pretty good when you know the generator. So if you know the examples of like 5 or 10 deepfake generators, this method here gives you more than 95% accuracy. And this is okay, this is good. But in real life, most of the times what we have is open set. So most of the times we need to assume that we do not know the generator or any example of that generator. So when you have the open set, no method in the literature as of today hits 90%. No method is better than 90%. Typically, they are around 80%, 80, for open set. And typically, they are better than 95 for closed set when you know examples of the generators. So here's an example. So here, the method was trained with genuine examples, we call it real, and 4 generators: deepfakes, face-to-face, face swap, and neurotextures. Examples of these 4 generators. If I can train my method with examples of these 4 generators and examples of real, I'm going to learn the process. I'm going to learn the artifacts associated with them. So I can learn that the noise of real image is much richer, especially in the regions of the eye, the mouth. If you look, for instance, at the neurotextures, you can see that the noise in the cheeks is very, very poor. And the noise around the mouth is very poor as well. But the thing is, we might not have access to examples of particular generators. So when we train these methods, we need to have the open set formulation in mind. And this is a challenge in the field of biometrics, and it is a challenge in the field of forensics. Even in artificial intelligence, open set is considered one of the challenge of the decade 2020-2030. So this is an open research question, and we are exploring solutions for these right now. But until now, we do not have solution for the open set detection of deep fakes in images, in videos, and in audio. If you have the options and you have the capability of detecting these, it would be very nice. Here's an example. In this case here, we know examples of the generators, and you can detect, for instance, the addition of glasses, the change of hair, or you can, if the image is totally synthetic, as in the middle row, you can pretty much get it right almost 100%. If it's a photograph, the resulting mask is going to be black. So this is a good result, of course it is. But this works if you have access to some of the generators. If you don't have access to generators, the result is different, and it's open, and it's a challenge. So the perspectives that we have as a field in terms of detecting synthetic realities, by now, I'm sure that you understand the importance of detecting those. This is now a much more difficult problem than we had 20 years ago when we used computer vision and signal processing to detect forgeries. Because of the speed of change, now it's unprecedented. So if today I'm using these artifacts here to detect the forgeries, the deepfakes, it's very likely that the next versions of the generators will already pretend to have this kind of noise, and my detector will be broken. So it will be defeated. So we need different kinds of actions, and one key action here is cooperation between different groups. We need to acknowledge that we have an open set nature for this problem. We cannot and should not assume that we know all of the generators. We need to be aware of the unknown. We need to be aware that these deepfakes can and will be used in combination of attacks to biometric systems. So suppose that you have your phone, and typically when you try to enter the phone to authenticate, you can use the fingerprint or you can use a face, right? This is the typical two options. And until recently, the most common attacks to this authentication process was someone presenting something to the phone, like a printed photo or a silicone mask or a silicone finger or a replay of a tablet in front of the phone to deceive the phone authentication system. This process is called spoofing or presentation attack. But more recently, we are starting to have two new kinds of attacks. One is the attacks using deepfakes because they can be done in real time. So if the system is active, asking the person to blink and to move the head, you can do that with deepfakes and it will work. The second, now we have injection attacks that you can insert these samples in the process of authentication during the moment that you have a conversation, for instance. So I could have a conversation with you over Zoom, and I could be replacing my face, and you would be thinking that I'm another person. So it's an injection attack in our communication channel over Zoom. So all of this is happening, and it affects trust. So from deepfakes to full synthetic realities, what can we do? This is the message that I'm going to leave to you today. We know that AI is going to be key for detection. We know that specialists need to help us to identify what can be improved. I already mentioned to you that we need to combine different methods. This is a must, right? And in discussions with colleagues, we came out with at least 4 actions. The first, we need some standardization. I mean, when you have some formats for images and audio and etc., we need some efforts to have standardization so that you can spot some changes. For instance, the new format JPEG, JPEG AI, and JPEG Trust, they have been studied for years, and they are now being launched into mainstream. And they help a lot in terms of having the chain of custody, the chain of modifications if someone modifies a specific file. It's not the solution, but it helps. A second action that's very, very important, and the European Union, for instance, is discussing these. Brazil is discussing these. Capitol Hill in the US is discussing this, is regulation. We need to have regulation for the creation of synthetics and for AI when the objective is to deceive people. Of course, we need to have the design of technical solutions to help us identify the forgeries, the fakes. And finally, the most important of all, we need people to know that this thing exists. We need people to teach their children that whenever they interact online, they should check, at least to be aware that the other part might not be there. It might be another person. We should be aware that when we see something, when we see like the Pope wearing puffy clothes or Trump being arrested by several policemen and being hit and thrown to the ground, this might be fake. So we need to question, we need to activate our system too. If we don't do this, if we don't do anything, we are going to have problems. And we are going to affect the 3 pillars of our society in the West. Democracy, because if each person can have its own reality, then we don't have reality. Each person will believe what this person wants. And when trust is eroded, there is no representation, there is no trust in the other part, there is no way that we can have a democratic government. If we have this possibility of deceiving people all the time, we lose our individual freedom. And we have a hit on our social tolerance. And we need to act now because according to Ernest Hemingway in this very famous quote, how it all happened in 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. So we might, and we should know that what we are living now is happening gradually. But all of a sudden, it will change drastically. So this is my message to you. And with that, I open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anderson. And if you can turn on your camera so I can verify that Anderson is a real person giving the web.
Not that fast. You would need some detectors.
I have my eyes and I can tell that. Anyway, so thank you very much. Please accept our, I have to change my video. Please accept our virtual thanks. And we really appreciate your exciting talk. I have written a number of questions, but I defer to Vito to the questions that our participants have. So Vito, can you please read the questions?
So we have a couple of questions, and if anybody wants to ask something, feel free to post it in the Q&A. So maybe the first question, has anybody, so from Khalid, has anyone done research using FNIRS or EEG to actually look at how the brain interprets these false realities?
Yes, we have, my group, no, but I know of some groups studying how the brain interprets or reacts to fakes. And there are two things that I would like to mention here. The first is there is a study from Darius Saki about 15 years ago with people that really went to a specific event and how they remember that event when they see some fakes. So they did some experiments with people participating in 2003 of the peace demonstrations in Rome, in Italy. And then Darius Saki and his team, they enrolled some of these people after the event in an experiment. And this experiment is very nice and famous now. He showed to people participating in the event real photos and fake photos. They divided in control groups and the test group. People that saw the fakes, they remembered the event differently. So the event was peaceful, no confrontation with the police, no tear gas, nothing like that. But then he showed to these people these kind of thing, confrontation with the police, tear mask, tear gas, and everything. So these people participated in the event and they remembered confrontation with the police, which is false. It didn't happen, right? So when people see things, even things that they participated in the past, if this thing is fake, they tend to change how they perceive the event. So this is very dangerous in the hands of bad governments. Okay, this is the thing. The second thing is recently there has been a continuation, a follow-up study related to this using deepfakes. So you can implant memories on people, showing them some deepfakes. So they will remember a particular thing differently if they see a deepfake narrating something. Okay, so it's very important. We need to understand the brain. Not only doing this research technically, we also need neuroscience to understand what's going on, because our brain is tricky, powerful but tricky.
Interesting. I have a follow-up question on that, Anderson. So is there work being done on using how people, so real people, interpret or detect deep fakes and trying to incorporate that into detection models, you know, like psychophysics, where you would look at which region,
like perceptual models, right?
Perceptual models. Is there work on
yeah
this?
I'm really eager to do that. I'm just submitting a proposal, a research grant, and we want to understand how we can use this feedback loop and also psychological cues to help us understand the effects of deepfakes. But right now, I'm not aware of this kind of study.
Okay. So another question in the chat. So for all these artifacts and generated data, you need quality, size of the data matters for training, right? What implication does that have? So on video analysis for human surveillance or security applications. So I think that's related to the trust issue, right? So is it real?
So most of the fakes that we see nowadays, you can attest for that. is the result of downsampling. So people will create the fake and then they will downsample, because when you downsample, you have the compression artifacts, and then the specialists, the experts, they will confound the compression artifacts with the artifacts of the fake. So when you receive something in WhatsApp, for instance, first of all, if you receive in WhatsApp, it's not official, right? So typically it's going to come in lower resolution, because the typical way of concealing the fake is reducing the resolution. If you have more resolution, then you have more ability, you have more telltales that you can rely on to identify the fakes. But we know that it's the same for biometrics. When you have low resolution, it's a problem, right? So the same for forensics. If it's very low resolution, we have the confusion of the compression artifacts and the downsampling artifacts with the artifacts of the fake. So we need to use other things. For instance, the light, for instance, is something that's kind of robust to the decrease in resolution. So we typically go for physics when that happens.
Okay, so we have another question from Solenir. So first, congratulations on the talk. And considering digital forensic and synthetic realities, what would you say are the current hot research topics? So fake news and deepfake detection are some, but is there anything more specific that researchers should put more work on?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that in terms of AI and forensics biometrics, okay? So in terms of AI, the decade of 2010, 2015, basically was discriminative AI. The objective was to separate things. But then in terms of AI now, 2020 to 2030, you have pretty much four objectives, four real big challenges. The first is generative AI. The second is causality. The third is self-supervised learning. And with this causality, self-supervised learning, and generative AI, we also have OpenSet. So these four challenges in AI in general. Then we go for biometrics. OpenSet is also a real problem. And in forensics, a real problem. So OpenSet methods for forensics and biometrics, really big challenge, worth pursuing. Detection of synthetic realities, as I mentioned. Self-supervised learning. It is a challenge in AI, and it is a challenge in biometrics and forensics. Why? Because we don't have enough data. When you don't have enough data, you need to rely upon other methods to help you to train, and self-supervised learning is key. I'm going to give you an example. We just had a paper accepted in CHIPS in which we leverage self-supervised learning for the problem of person re-identification. We don't use any kind of labels, nothing. We just get the crop of an image as input, and we only use self-supervised learning. Surprise, the method is better than any supervised method out there. Even CVPR latest methods using supervised, when you use properly the self-supervised, it is very powerful. So it is a very interesting topic of research to develop self-supervised learning for biometrics, for recognition, for deepfake detection, for verification, and OpenSet. So pretty much is tied with the challenges of AI.
Yeah, so I think this also answers the question. So Ajita was asking what is the new frontier in deepfakes and spoofing? So is there something specific you can add?
Definitely the new frontier is OpenSet and self-supervised learning.
So we have a question from Maria. So what would you say existing OpenSet detectors? So there are some, right? So you also work on these type of problems. How good are existing OpenSet detectors in the detection of the latest generation of synthetic images, probably going to diffusion-based models, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, diffusion models they are still a little bit behind in terms of the quality of deepfakes, but they are coming pretty fast because they are much better than guns, right? In terms of detection using OpenSet, if you don't have any example of the deepfake, suppose that you only have the pristine images, you only have the photographs, real ones. I don't see any method right now crossing the limit of 80%, 80. Of course, you might have one specific data set, but in general, if you have a big data set, like the one from Facebook, the one from Google, the one from Hong Kong, the one from Rocha in India, for these data sets, if it's totally open set, around 80%. So this is a challenge because it means that you are a little bit better than a coin.
So, yeah, so Jales, let's say, posing a related question. If you compare the existing GAN-based face swaps with diffusion models, is one harder than the other to detect? Is it just a matter of availability of the data?
Diffusion models right now are a little bit easier because they are kind of younger, but they are more powerful than GANs. GANs are very well known for being good replicators. So if you want to replicate a face, GAN will be very good to do that. But it does not bring diversity. So if you want like to have diversity, movement, and things like that, GANs will not be that good. So diffusion models, on the other hand, and you have seen Midjourney V5 is basically diffusion models. And it's very likely that in a few months or 1 year, diffusion models will be like the models to go for deepfakes probably, and then it will be more difficult to detect than GANs. But I think that as long as we can identify some artifacts, we are okay. The problem is, I really think that AI methods are so powerful nowadays that the artifacts will be less and less pronounceable.
Great.
So let me interrupt you here because at 1 hour we have to close, and Vito will tell us later, I guess, to all the participants, what's the way of answering the unanswered questions. Thank you very much for the talk, but I'll close with, how do we convince the students that are in our audience that they have to do a PhD? What's your argument?
Well, convincing people of doing a PhD, asking for a professor is like biased, right? I just love science and I love doing science. And what I can tell everybody here is that one of the best ways of helping society is doing science. So being a scientist.
All right. So thank you very much, Anderson. So since the best way of doing science is being a scientist, I will insert the word, do a PhD if you can. So because you can be a scientist without a PhD, but do a PhD if you can. So thank you very much again. Accept our virtual applause.
Thank you.
And let's thank all the participants for being here. I really appreciate your participation. And Vito will email us when this talk will be posted in YouTube. Thank you very much, Anderson. Thank you very much, Vito. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye to everyone.